if I'm a sportsbook operator and I limit every customer under the sun that has a pulse, I don't get to see their business going forward. Circa can, Prime can, offshores can. They can tag those customers. They understand those customers. On the recreational sportsbook side, they just open up another account and another account and another account.
Welcome to Circles Off. I'm Rob Pizzola. We have a great guest interview today. Someone who's been in the syndicate side of things and now on the trading side of things. Lots of topics we're going to go over: the betting industry, how things work behind the scenes, market dynamics, even what it's like trading for March Madness. But before we get into that, I do want to tell you about the sponsor here on Circles Off, which is Underdog. Sometimes you just want a quick, easy way to get in on the action without spending hours handicapping games, doing research. With Underdog's Pick'em, there's no overthinking. It's no stressing about line movement, no debating if you should take the +4 or the +3.5 at -120 or +100, I guess, in this example. Just pick higher or lower on player projections, submit your entry, enjoy the ride. Right now, new users who sign up with code CIRCLES get up to $1,000 in bonus credit plus a free pick. Tonight, that free pick is Kevin Durant higher than a half point against the Chicago Bulls. That's it. You need one bucket from KD, and you're already cashing in on your free pick.
I think he'll get that.
I think he will. I mean, if he goes down with an injury before getting first for 1 point, this show is cursed. But I think he's going to get that. I know a lot of you out there are sharp bettors. You love finding edges. You like breaking down the probabilities like I do, beating the books. That's great. But sometimes it's nice to just have fun without worrying about the VIG or market efficiency or anything like that. Underdog is the product that gives you that. It's an easy, enjoyable way to play with your sports knowledge and get some instant action. So if you're looking for something different, sign up with code CIRCLES today. Use the link in the description below. Grab that free pick, test it out, see what you think. It's a fun way to follow the games. And hey, Kevin Durant scoring at least 1 point. I like your chances if you do sign up tonight. Use code CIRCLES.
Here we go.
Our guest today is a powerhouse in the sports betting world with over a decade of experience driving innovation and growth in regulated markets. As the director of trading at Amelco, he leads a team of over 50 pros delivering cutting-edge sportsbook solutions globally, including Bet99 in Canada. His journey started at StarLizard with soccer market analysis. Now he's transforming the industry with a focus on automation and customer-centric platforms. Mark Hill joins me today. Welcome to Circles Off, Mark.
Pleasure to be on, Rob.
This has been in the making for a while. A little bit of background. I don't know Mark well. We've interacted via LinkedIn every now and then. There is a Betstamp Discord, which is, a hot buzzing community. Every now and then I like to go in there and ask for any sort of guest ideas, suggestions. Mark, your name was recommended by the entire Discord, basically. So you have some expectations to live up to, certainly today, as a lot of people did want to hear this. But you have a pretty long and storied history in the sports betting industry, working both on the syndicate side with StarLizard, now on the operator side. So walk us through how you got started in the space and what led you to where you are today.
I think without trying to turn it into sort of a spanky be better bettors type background, I'll give you a little bit of the untraditional route, I suppose, into the industry on this side. So I grew up in Northern Ireland, and probably if you know your Northern Irish history, I was an 80s baby, grew up in late 80s, early 90s, height of the Troubles type scenario, and came from a very sort of traditional unionist background. Not exposed in any way, shape, or form did I think, or my parents think, to betting. However, inadvertently I was. So my grandfather grew up on the main street in a village called Moira. He had a pub on one side and a bookmaker's on the other side of his house. He was a greyhound trainer, and by default, as a youngster, was running around greyhound stadiums, running around betting rings, asked, to be a mini runner, doing £1, £2 bets for people at the greyhounds and things like that. So whilst it wouldn't have come from the traditional sense of my parents raising me around betting or thinking they were raising me around betting, inadvertently I was exposed to it at a very young age. I guess as well then, my sporting interest has always been there from a very young age as well. So grew up playing rugby. My father was a massive rugby man, and he came in and brought me into rugby at the ages of 4 or 5, played that through to sort of a semi-pro level in the end. And then beyond that, I would always describe myself as a footballer stuck in a rugby player's body. So, I'm 6'3", 6'4", 20 stone. I'm never taken to a soccer field outside of charity. And fell in love with the sport, fell in love with the dynamics, and fell in love with the analytical side of soccer and football as a whole. And I guess indirectly, it's how I kind of went from having that first exposure of a little bit of the betting side with the betting shop next door, and my grandfather being, around the greyhounds and, running around the stadiums and things like that, right through to becoming exposed to what is the predominant betting sport, if you like, within the UK and Irish market, which is the football side of things.
Yeah. A lot to unpack there. I did want to say, I didn't know you were Northern Irish. I've been to Northern Ireland before. I absolutely loved it. I did all the tours, seeing like historic sites from the Troubles, which you were mentioning. I think it might have been in Northern Ireland and not Ireland, Republic of Ireland, where it was like the most bombed hotel in the world. Which was really interesting to see, like the architecture and how that's changed over time and stuff like that. Anyways, just randomly, I wanted to put it out there that Northern Ireland is actually one of the most beautiful places I've ever visited in my entire life. I'd highly recommend anyone check it out if you haven't before. I will say I spent a lot of time there, 21 days in total, Northern and Republic of Ireland. I got 1 day of rain in 21 days.
That is a shock,
yes,
to say the least. But yeah, do you remember what year roughly you were over?
Yeah, this would have been right before COVID. So I guess 2019-ish would have been.
Brilliant. Yeah. Game of Thrones tour, maybe
exactly
up the coast and stuff. Yeah.
I was a huge Game of Thrones fan, and my wife an even larger Game of Thrones fan. So we saw all the filming locations. It was very Game of Thrones-esque at the time, but I had a blast. Some of the most scenic places I've ever seen in my entire life as well. Just very calming, relaxing spot. Sorry to hijack it, but I heard you say Northern Ireland right away, and I'm like, I've never really gotten to talk Northern Ireland with anyone before. I wanted to throw that in there.
No, I appreciate that. It's a very, very underrated tourist destination. Unfortunately, the only negative is there's no transatlantic flights. So I can't jump on a flight in Belfast and go over to Canada or North America. I have to go via Dublin, which is fine. It's a 2-hour journey. It's not the end of the world. But I think for tourist exposure, it would definitely help if we had some transatlantic routes, because at the moment, you have to go via Dublin, and a lot of the perception is go to Dublin. Dublin is reflective of the whole of Ireland, or the island of Ireland, and really it's cities like Belfast, Galway, Cork that I think you get the true reflection of what the Irish people are about and what the Irish culture is about.
Absolutely. Galway was a huge highlight for me as well. I know a good friend of mine, Sam Paniotovich, was just there recently as well, and he was raving about that whole experience. It's not that bad. I flew into Dublin. I rented a car, drove it to Belfast, like you said, a couple hours, was in and around there. Just a beautiful time. I actually didn't realize how the center of Belfast, how much it's like a budding commercial spot as well. There's lots of office spots now. I didn't really expect that, and that was 6 years ago as well. So I'm sure it's even bigger at this point in time. But I'll get back to you after we did our Irish tourism. We don't get paid for it, but I do love the spot. StarLizard is a brand that all of the sharp bettors are familiar with. Massive syndicate. You spent almost a decade at StarLizard. Certainly one of the most well-known, if not the biggest betting syndicate in the world. What was that experience like for you? What specifically did you do within StarLizard, and how did it shape your understanding of betting markets?
I think the precursor to ending up at StarLizard was rooted in my love of football to begin with. I grew up, said in the 90s, I was a Middlesbrough fan for my sins on the soccer side. Brian Robson, sort of Janino, Ravanelli, that sort of era of Middlesbrough. Everyone at home supported my night at Liverpool, and I got there was a magazine at the time called Match Magazine. There was a pull-out poster of the last year at Ayresome Park, and I only ever had 2 posters that I can remember on my wall as a child. One was the Middlesbrough Division 1 winning team to get into the Premier League, and the other was Anna Kournikova. I don't know which one is a better reflection of my future life, but yeah, it definitely set the foundations for the direction I was going. So on the football side, there's a very, very well-known computer game over here called Championship Manager.
Yep.
Became Football Manager after time over, Sega and Sports Interactive sort of deviated and split away. But I played that game as a hobby, and then I got to start working on the research and analytics side for Football Manager for the Irish leagues. Long story short, a lot of my colleagues were doing something very similar. So my Italian counterpart, my Polish counterpart, my American counterpart, they all ended up at a company called StarLizard. And at the time, I was totally naive. I was recreationally betting, like growing up around that culture and an accepted culture of legalized or regulated betting in the UK and Ireland. I was very much exposed to the poker boom and everything else associated with that. But for my naivety, I did not know who Tony Bloom was. I did not know who StarLizard were. So I was deep in the weeds. My full-time job at the time was working in politics, which again is a whole podcast in itself, being from Northern Ireland and working in politics. But I was doing the Football Manager stuff as a hobby. And my Italian counterpart said, do you fancy flying over to London, meeting the guys at StarLizard and looking someone for the Irish network? So I flew over, met them, did a trial for 2 weeks, and then they sort of appointed me as the analyst for the Irish football research. And that was basically covering everything from sort of under 17 age up right through to women's football, and then the predominant leagues, the predominant sort of professional or semi-professional leagues, both north and south of the border in Ireland. So with that, we built up a contact network within each club or local journalists. We built up a lot of analytics and research. But the one thing I'll say about StarLizard, very, very compartmentalized. Like Tony Bloom, absolute genius, and an absolute pleasure to work for, and we'll probably get into that in a little more detail shortly. But for me, the compartmentalized nature and the secure nature of that syndicate meant that the team I worked for was like the analytics side of things and more qualitative work and qualitative research into the teams, the formations, the player form, elements like that. And more often than not, our department, we're keeping the syndicate, if you like, off a bet rather than putting us onto a bet.
Got it.
So a lot of the dynamic, a lot of the focus was on trusting the model first and foremost. It's well established how good that model has been and how rewarding it has been for the company, and every year redefining the edges associated with that. But our network, if you like, was to, if the model did indicate a strong bet, we'd keep them off the bet more than so that, my information was not to put them onto a bet, which I think some of your listeners probably find as a surprise. A lot of the edges now come from, reacting quickly to NBA team news or something like that. Whereas before, in the syndicate side, model was gospel, and any inputs we had from the research department was more keeping them off a bet rather than putting them onto a bet.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on that really quickly, because nowadays I don't bet soccer much, but I do try to keep up with markets and see how things are going. It does seem to me like there's a lot of action nowadays on lineup confirmations relative to action before that. So as soon as a team releases a lineup, I'm a Juventus fan, I see them release it on Twitter, I see the betting market start to go nuts. So it still feels to me like it's really information driven, but I assume that it is information driven in the sense that you're waiting for lineups, but it's just a model number that essentially StarLizard is betting into market.
That's fair. I think when I joined the company, and I'm not talking about giving away edges or anything at this point, 10 years ago, the edge that StarLizard had was that network. They were doing expected goals or a variation of expected goals well before that became popular culture.
Got it.
So that is where they made their bread and butter. As the industry catches up and the data collection catches up and the metrics catch up, that edge will be whittled away. You've got a lot of, not pretenders, but a lot of new syndicates emerging in the space, competing against them. None less than Smart Odds, who was Matthew Benham and Brentford at the time, sort of a bitter rival, if you like, of StarLizard. So as those metrics advanced, and it wasn't down to StarLizard collecting all those advanced metrics, the edge had to change. And I think one of the things that I remember most about my latter time in the industry was when I joined, can't give a fair estimate. I'd say 70% pre-match, 30% in play.
Yep.
Whereas when I was leaving, it was almost the inverse of that, where the market, the market was so saturated with pre-match information and pre-match knowledge that their edge became the in-play models and the live models, and diversifying into other sports and other leagues as well outside of just the soccer world. So for me, again, not privy to the defined edges that the model had, but enough of an insight to understand the dynamics and how that edge was changing over time.
Yeah, what's really interesting there's lots of things that are really interesting to me about that story. I've heard very similar from some bigger soccer bettors I know nowadays that are moving more to live markets, where actually the limits are extremely high for soccer live markets as well. So that's interesting. Also, the fact that you ended up at StarLizard without any real pro betting experience. I think that's very counterintuitive to what a lot of people would think in terms of how syndicates work, and employing someone that may be very raw in terms of their betting knowledge. I find that really interesting.
That's totally fair. And to be honest, that was reflective of the industry, or well, certainly StarLizard on a much wider level. So I mentioned about the compartmentalized nature. They have 4 different floors in their North London office. One floor will have the researchers, one floor will have the selectors, you'll have another floor for placement, you'll have another floor for IT support, and you've got the quant division based out of a completely different city in England, ATAS doing all their quant work and quant modeling. You've got the coders that code the games and tag the games based in another jurisdiction entirely. It was a massive world. How many were actually bettors within that ecosystem? You're talking probably 5 to 10% at most. And I would have classed myself as one of those bettors, maybe not a savvy, sharp bettor, if you like. I reflect back on my very first bet, which you'll know the competition, you'll know the event I'm talking about. It was the 2002 World Cup when I had a bet on South Korea to beat Italy.
I remember that. The biggest fixed job in the history of sport, I think, right there.
Something like that. Well, I very naively at 16 or 17 did not know when I put on the bet slip or got my father to fill in the bet slip and submitted at the bookies that I put South Korea to win versus Italy.
Yep.
The game went to extra time.
Yes.
So I did not, totally naive at the time, did not understand the betting rules and mechanics. I still have to deal with it on this side of the counter now all the time. No disrespect to the general North American public. They're used to betting, including overtime markets. Every time we have a World Cup or a Euros or something significant on the soccer side, the amount of customer service queries we have to deal with for games that go into extra time or penalties is insane. But I learned the hard way on my very first bet, which I thought was a winner, celebrated like a winner, went to cash the ticket, and then told, no, you've lost. So repeated the bet on against Spain in the next round and bet to qualify rather than to win. But yeah. I've listened to a lot of your stories as well in terms of your recreational background before you became fully aware and fully conscious of how this industry ticks and what you should be doing and not doing. And yeah, I learned the hard way very fast. Yeah,
I've been there before. I mean, there's been times where I was certain I won a bet and then you log into your account and it's a loss. And, like to not learn those through experience, definitely, but it happens. I remember the 2002 World Cup. If VAR existed at that, I'm going on a tangent now, but Francesco Totti would have been awarded a penalty instead of a second yellow for diving in the box where he was clearly clipped. But Italians remember that game very clearly. The game against Spain was actually worse. I believe there was a goal that Spain scored, which they ruled the ball went out of bounds.
So the guy who crossed it, the ball was on the line when he crossed it, and they said it was out for a goal kick instead.
Well, that was my first. Those 2 matches sent me on a tailspin of conspiracy theories for a long time in sports.
Yeah. But we'll hopefully not stay on that theme too much if we're going to get into talking about regulators and stuff later, because if we give them any ammunition, they're going to run with it. So
I'm moving on right now, Mark. I'm moving on right now. What ultimately made you transition from the betting side to the operational and risk management side of the industry?
Full transparency, it wasn't through choice. So if I reflect back on myself in 2019, I just bought a new house. I was expecting second child in early 2020. We were over for a StarLizard annual conference with the rest of the team in October 2019. Nobody envisaged COVID coming along in early 2020 and just the whole world of sports shutting down.
Yep.
Like everything was on such a high. I was on such a high. StarLizard were thriving. We just opened up new offices or expanded the office in London. I was covering a few extra leagues for the company as well. It was just brilliant at the time. And then, like a ton of bricks in May 2020, they made the decision to let over 100 from the company go. So wasn't through choice in terms of leaving StarLizard at the time. And to be honest, that sort of period post StarLizard left me in a very, and a lot of my colleagues and friends in a very difficult position, because we worked in such a niche area. And yes, reputationally, working for StarLizard is great, but you're in such a niche area overall. And if the world of sport is shut down, you have very little options to all of a sudden pivot and go to somewhere else. All the other competitors, if you like, in the syndicate space were also shut down or reducing costs at that time. Really, I was left going, well, there's Belarusian soccer and there's Russian soccer and there's not much else at the minute. I need to diversify. So I was a massive, massive fan of North American sports, NFL predominantly, but then by default sort of falling into NBA, NHL, and to an extent MLB, not religiously MLB, but obsessed with the college level of football, obsessed with the NFL. And I basically spent that 10 months, it was 10 months in the end, out of work, grafting. And not grafting for money. I did sort of set aside some of my syndicate payout from StarLizard to say, right, that'll be a bankroll to get started. But you realize very quickly when you have a mortgage and you have a second child just born and all the real world scenarios, that working off what was a respectable bankroll, but not a bankroll that's sustainable for growth when you have to dip in and out of it. I had to make the decision to say, right, I'm learning about this industry inside out. I'm very conscious post-PASPA that there's going to be expansive growth within that US market or the North American market. How do I upskill myself, not just to be limited to football or soccer or just be seen as someone who works in the analytics side and not so much the wider industry. So I basically spent that 10 months consuming content, doing courses, learning as much as I could to understand how that North American market operated. And it sounds very like naive, if you like, where I'm now, moving on 4 or 5 years, I'm in a very luxurious position within the industry now. But back then, I was like a lot of your listeners or a lot of these people that are discovering sports betting in the US for the first time, where you get left behind if you're not consuming the content, if you're not listening to podcasts, if you're not keeping up with the latest trends and the latest courses and latest developments within the industry. And I have to pay tribute to some of your predecessors, I guess, in the Betstamp space. VSIN at the time very much changed when the Draftkings piece happened, and they've gone in a different direction to a degree now. But back then, that sort of early period of 2020, 2021, etc., Gil Alexander's show and other shows, like they paved the way for you listen to a nugget of information and you're going, okay, I'm going to follow up on that. I'm going to research something else. I'm going to model something else or try my hand at knowing more about what direction he was thinking whenever he stated, this is why I'm playing that bet, or this is why I'm, interested. So I spent a lot of time doing that. Got to sort of Christmas period of 2020 and a lot of the family looking at me going, you're grinding, you're doing all this. I hope it's worth it. You're doing 12, 16 hours a day, but we're not making money. You've got to put bread on the table. So I honestly got to the point where I was like, I'm applying for Amazon delivery drivers, postman jobs, anything that could just start to get the bread and butter money in while I grafted the hobby on the side.
Yep.
I applied for an overnight tennis trader job at a company called PokerStars. You'll know PokerStars.
Yep.
At the time, based out of Dublin, overnight tennis trader job, paying probably $18,000, $20,000, something like that. And they turned me down. And they turned me down saying I was too experienced. Now, I had never worked on that side of the counter or the industry. And I basically went on a LinkedIn rant, yep. Redacted the email I'd received saying you're, brilliant skill set, blah, blah, blah. But you're too experienced for the role, which now that I'm a manager in a team of 50, if I would never reject someone based on being too experienced. You can never have enough experience around it. So I went on a rant, and my predecessor at Amelco, amongst about 3 or 4 others, reached out and said, do you fancy a call? Did a call. And it came down to 2 questions. They're looking for 2 individuals to join the team. One is on the risk side. Have you any risk management experience, which I didn't at that time whatsoever, based on the syndicate side. And then the second side was, do you have an interest in US sports? And that was the end of that. I could say, yep, 100%. I was able to rattle off stuff from the interview and walked in the door there back then, 2021, March 2021. So it's like 4 years now. Walked in the door, and by default, I was the only person in the company who really understood US sports. And that's kind of just ultimately paved my way then to do what I'm doing now. And timing was everything. That period of 10 months was horrible. But do not regret a second of it, because it's led to a job that I love now, good foundations, and hopefully a long-term career on this side.
Where did the love for US sports come from for you? Because traditionally, I have a lot of friends who are UK based. My friend Fabian Sommer is in Germany. He loves the NFL because he saw it on King of Queens, a sitcom. And he's like, I got to get into this. But he doesn't keep up with other North American sports because of the time difference. I've spent some time in Europe as well. It's really NHL game 7 o'clock Eastern time. It starts at midnight, sometimes 1 a.m., 2 a.m., depending on where you are in Europe. So where did that love for North American sports come from?
We were quite lucky growing up in the UK. I think it was Channel 4 and Channel 5 at the time. Their coverage of the NFL in particular was quite extensive. They had a lot of highlights packages, and if I go through my teens years, I was sitting there late at night anyway, and it happened to be on, and you consume it at that point.
Yeah,
I properly fell in love with the sport, I would say, when I found my team, and my team that I fell upon. And a lot of UK and Irish people and European people will fall on a team for various reasons. For me, it was the Saints. The whole dynamic and the story around Katrina at that time.
Yep.
I've been following the sport, Drew Brees, the Reggie Bush draft, like just everything around that. The no-hopers, with all the hope now of reborn out of Katrina. I just fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the team, and the rest is history. So by nature, I started to sit up at night watching the NFL Sunday, Monday, Thursday. Sort of transitioned away from watching WWE during my late nights to watching the NFL, and then by default, it sort of fell into some of the other sports as well. I'm just given my nature, I'm quite inquisitive, so I started to want to know the narrative behind these NFL players before they get to the NFL. So then started to track the college game and look into that in more depth, and just sort of snowball effect from there.
That's cool. Very cool. You've worked on both the B2B side, business to business side with Amelco, with where you are right now, B2C when you were working at StarLizard. What are the biggest differences for you in how each of those operates?
I guess technically I wouldn't class StarLizard as B2C, so to speak.
Okay.
But I can definitely draw comparisons between working for a syndicate that is a super well-oiled, slick machine, very defined roles, very defined process, and very process-oriented and organized and diligent.
Yep.
On the syndicate side, like I've already talked about Tony Bloom being fantastic, but we wanted for nothing. You were there, you had a very clear goal and focus. The culture was fantastic, and because you were well looked after, and everyone knew that they were contributing to something bigger than themselves. On the B2B world, it's not that we are not culturally sound, but you have so much diversification across multiple verticals and multiple platforms and multiple jurisdictions that it's very hard to have that consistency and robustness that you would experience with a syndicate side, or even if you were B2C and you only had one sportsbook to look after.
Right.
On the B2B world, I'm trade director. I have a lot of focus and interest in the North American market, and it's just by default the growth of Amelco in that space has been hand in hand since I've joined the company, so it's been very helpful. But we're also active in Africa, we're also active in the UK and Ireland, we're also active in Asia, and having to, not just my side and the trading side, having to diversify and have conversations 1 minute with a casino in Arkansas, and the next minute have a conversation with a sports book that's very horse racing focused in South Africa. Those calls could be back to back, and it's the same for a developer. If you're working on a piece of code or a product innovation in the B2B space, and you have a ticket 1 minute for a bet slip upgrade in Africa, or let's say Nigeria or Kenya or one of those African books, they want 30 30 bets on a bet slip and the 1 cent or $1 bets, whereas the same developer a week later or even the next day could be working on a ticket that is about enabling cash out on an SGP, something like that. The contrast in this B2B world is massive, and it's the benefit of that, if you like, is the growth of the team, the growth of the company over that period has been much bigger than I would have probably experienced had I stayed just in the syndicate space, because I'm getting exposure to the global picture and new markets and new products every day. That's a blessing on this side of it. And still, for us, it's a private family-run company that's, yes, done very well over the last 3-4 years, but we're still intimately involved in the product direction, the trading direction, and having our voice listened to. Whereas in the syndicate space or a lot of the B2B space, if I reflect on interviews I've done with people who have only worked for Bet365, for example, I don't think I've hired anyone directly from there because they're so, again, compartmentalized or isolated on one area that they don't get the growth and experience. Our best hires have come from people who have, yes, worked on the syndicate side, but also that have diversified and worked B2B before, or worked for other white label companies. And it's been massive in terms of that growth on that side of it.
From the sportsbook side of things, what are the biggest challenges that a sportsbook will face when working with a platform provider like Amelco? And then I guess as part of that, Mark, as well, just give the audience a general, you can explain Amelco a little bit more and specifically what you guys do over there.
Yeah, sure. Biggest challenges is alignment of those roadmaps and visions. So not to reflect too much on Amelco, but I can talk certainly around the trading department. I came into the company, as I said, in 2021 with 13 traders. And whilst a lot of those guys have moved on and done good things, we were stuck in a rut as a department where we were pretty much just watching a bet ticker. We were pretty much, a little bit of bet settlement. It was a redundant role, if you like, where there wasn't the back and forth with the operators, there wasn't the back and forth with the other departments within Amelco, and we were very, very isolated. When I look at the growth now, where we have over 50 in the team, we're split across sort of 4 or 5 sub-departments and the direction we're going, it's totally, totally different. The biggest difficulty we have, I guess, is aligning what we'd call our internal roadmap with the roadmaps of the expectant customers. And if you look at Ontario, for example, where we've had Bet99 and FitzTheirs there, 2 very contrasting remits and sportsbooks. Bet99 very much seeing themselves as a sports entertainment brand. FitzTheirs, rightly or wrongly, wanted to target champion sports and make a mockery, if you like, of them being British and different. And you will have seen some of the billboards, etc., that would have been up there. Couple that with the change, not just in 2 sports books that operate in the same market, but then couple in, as I mentioned, those books in South Africa or the books in the UK and Ireland or the books in other jurisdictions. Just such a contrast in terms of what they would like as the next product feature versus what we would try to drive as an internal roadmap as well. So there's pros and cons. 9 times out of 10, most of our operators can sort of piggyback off the internal roadmap, which is a benefit to them. They may have to wait a little bit longer if they want to prioritize earlier in time. They can sort of pay what's called T&M and can have dedicated developers, and they'll develop those product features, which a company like Bet99 certainly do. And then just to reflect on Amelco, just again, a lot of people will not know the name and that side of things. We probably best known within the space at the minute for sort of laying some of the foundations for Hard Rock and Fanatics, I guess, to get off the ground. And that was, I work predominantly in the white label space, but that was what we call a source code deal. So Amelco historically have done a lot of component parts for the industry. We've worked with most of the industry leaders doing, could be anything from the PAM to the wallet side, to the sports book, to the front end, to the back end. We've done a big range. But when Hard Rock came knocking initially, and then Fanatics after that, they needed something to get them off the ground that just gave the foundations to take a platform that's ready-made as end-to-end, and then they can do their own development on top of that and sort of take the source code their own direction. That undoubtedly has paved the way for Amelco's security, if you like, as a company for the next 5-10 years potentially, but also help with the reputation, because we've seen the growth of those two sports books, not necessarily on the level of Draftkings and FanDuel, but certainly in a short amount of time, building up a reputation. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more at some point.
Yeah, so I'm not referring to Bet99 or FitzDares, Hard Rock Fanatics when I ask this question, but a lot of bettors assume that sportsbooks operate independently of one another, right? Each sportsbook runs their own thing, but many of them actually rely on the same trading and risk management infrastructure, right? Can be, for example, with BetRivers and Unibet would be one that maybe people know about. Entain owns several properties in the space as well, which have similar odd sets. How much do sportsbooks actually have control over their own product? And like, what are the advantages and disadvantages of using a white label sportsbook setup versus an operator building everything in-house? Kind of a loaded question, but I'd like you to go into that a little bit.
No, totally fair question. Again, from my side of things, I've been very blessed to work for a company that is a little more dynamic than the traditional white label space, if you like. There's a lot of players out there in this space that just give plug and play sportsbooks and don't allow the operator to really have the flexibility to pick the product the direction they want. You've mentioned a few there. Like, if I go on a Canby sportsbook, I know immediately it's a Canby sportsbook. If I go on a Amelco sportsbook, I think you can navigate, if you're savvy with the industry, you'll work out it's an Amelco sportsbook fairly quickly, but you can't tell instantly it's an Amelco sportsbook potentially. That for me has allowed me the insight, if you like, into listening to those customers and seeing them, the personalization that goes ahead with that,
right.
But also makes me detest the actual plug and play space of just another generic white label, just another generic trading desk, etc. Thankfully, I'm at a company that doesn't encourage that type of direction. Long way to go, but the positives for me, and I know that based on some of the exchanges on the Discord channel, some people don't like it, but we have insight to a wide range of betting patterns globally, and certainly within that North American market. We've got insight on when a RAS release happens. We've got insight on when something significant happens, when a syndicate might bet into us on another jurisdiction or another book. That sort of insight, if you are a standalone sportsbook, you do not get. And my frustration with that is trying to marry the two of, I want to take the bets, I want to see the bets, and I want people to sign up with their own identities. But then if you're confined by some of the elements of a white label, i.e., you're using the same generic feeds on both operators or something like that, then you're starting to get restricted in how dynamic you can be and how tolerant you can be to the limits overall. So I think there's building it in-house. If I look at the tier one side or tier one, tier two side, and I look at what Hard Rock and Fanatics have done, and then obviously Fanatics acquiring PointsBet and everything else associated with that, I'm a little bit biased. I think that has been the direction to go. I don't think you can build it solely from the ground up without some foundations. And from Amelco's perspective, it's about maintaining those relationships and maintaining those going forward, that hopefully they come back to us and say, we like that, now we're going to launch horse racing, or now we're going to launch our iGaming suite in a new state. Would you be prepared to, if we outsource that development to you, would you be happy to take that on and give us dedicated resources and things? So it's for us, it's more about just personalization and reputation. Yes, we've had those source code deals, but it's very, very hard for a sportsbook to organically grow out of nothing these days. You really do need some sort of stability. And are we the best in the field? Potentially not, but we do win business from the personalization nature, and being able to, as I mentioned, I've got Saracen Casino, for example, in Arkansas. We've got 50 to 60% market share there. And I think that's down to the hand-in-hand operations of them having a very clear vision about what they want with their sportsbook, and us being flexible enough to deviate them away from the Canby book we're up against or the Playtech book we're up against in that space. So yeah, it's double-edged sword. There's definitely benefits to it. There are definitely shortcomings. I think reverting back to your previous question about, can the sportsbook really control their product? They absolutely can, but it does come at an expense again. The sportsbooks that are able to innovate the most come to the table with the ideas, but they also come to the table, rightly or wrongly, with the financials to really back up and invest in the product.
Right. You talk about building a sportsbook from the ground up, and you've been involved in launching several sportsbook products, Bet99, FitzDares, Hard Rock. What does it actually take to build a sportsbook from scratch?
Yeah, interesting couple of books you've rhymed off there, because with both Bet99 and FitzTheirs, it was a migration versus a full build. So they already had kind of
Bet99 had a different trading platform when they first came. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, they were on Altenar and Dench, I believe, at the time. They kind of migrated across, and we're seeing more and more of that, if I'm perfectly honest. We're seeing a lot of companies that are in the space, or a lot of sportsbooks in the space, become disgruntled with the current provider or need to change direction or have a change of management. They recognize the shortcomings in the current platform and need to migrate. And I think over the last 2-3 years, we've done a lot more migrations rather than full builds from scratch. In terms of what it takes to build a sportsbook from scratch, unfortunately, in this regulated space in North America, a lot of hurdles. Again, I think we'll get into it, but the platform migration in itself, and pulling across player data and the regulatory and the GLI side, which is your certification. There's so many component parts that have to go through robust regulated checks, that for a a full launch from scratch, you have so many hurdles to get over to actually get off the ground. You're probably talking realistically 2 to 3 year lead-in times before you can actually launch a sportsbook successfully. Now, yes, there's fast track ways, and we've seen that in a number of jurisdictions. Another state might open up, and then all of a sudden you've got 7-8 players lining up to get off the ground. But a true from scratch build, we did that with Saracen in Arkansas. Completely new tech stack, brand new market entry, the whole brand positioning. That for us was a success story, but it really helped that the operator themselves knew what they wanted and were able to lay out to Amelco, yes, we're going to take a white label solution, which is effectively what we are, but we're going to help you also improve your North American platform for all your providers. We're going to have that feedback loop that allows us to engage and listen, and then make sure we're building upon the expertise that they have and the expertise that Hard Rock have and everything else. Biggest considerations when launching the sportsbook: choosing the right third-party partners.
Yeah.
And in our space, a sportsbook partner is not just confined to who is providing your odds feed or who's providing your trading services. We're talking CRM, we're talking KYC, geolocation,
customer service, there's all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
You would wonder why so many people are trying to get into the space and run in the space. It's an extremely competitive area. And one of the barriers, if you like, is when I came in sort of 4 years ago, I look at some of the sportsbooks we had then, and they had already gone through that whole due diligence of selecting their providers and working with Amelco and working with XYZ third-party feeds. And it's only when the likes of myself came in and some of my colleagues came in and really got under the hood and said, why are we partnering with this odd service provider? Or why are we partnering with this product that the customer wants, but why is nobody at Amelco sort of pushed back on it and said, this doesn't make business sense, this doesn't make product sense, nobody's going to bet that in X market or Y market. So yeah, it's the third-party partnerships, as well as building a team that really understands the regulatory restraints within each jurisdiction is key and crucial to that.
I do want to talk about some of the regulatory hurdles, but before we do, I'm curious, how does the sportsbook, in your experience, decide which technology to use, which trading models to use, which market-making strategies to use? How much of an input comes from your side of things versus the sportsbook? And like, I'm just going to level with you. Some of these brands in particular that you've worked with before would be known for limiting customers, and that's most of the brands in the space are known for limiting customers. But when it comes down to having those types of conversations, is it a recommendation from your side that says, hey, maybe we should explore this route, or is this the sportsbook that's making the decisions on their end?
Hopefully a collaboration for the most part. It doesn't always play out like that. You'll have very strong-minded operators that don't even necessarily come from the space, or maybe come from land-based casino, and they have a very clear vision about this is how we want the sportsbook to be.
Right.
And you will have others like Saracen, like 99 to an extent. It's like they're very open-minded to innovation and being creative and trying to do something a little bit differently. So the ideal compromise is you meet somewhere in the middle and you just have open discourse, very like a podcast like this. You just have open discourse, you chat back and forth, and you come to decisions. Some of them will be commercial decisions. Some of them will be based around trying to differentiate or trying to do something a little bit less vanilla in the space. In terms of that sort of planning, before they go to market, what tech stack, what trading models, what market making models. For me, that conversation, as I said, typically will happen 2 to 3 years in advance. If you've got the opportunity to not have a rushed, operator lead. And I look at states that aren't regulated at the minute, like Texas and California. Right. Probably not surprising to you, but conversations are already going on for 2-3 years with the local tribes, with license holders. Yep. They are doing their due diligence now, and that comes everything from a request for proposal or an RFP, where you basically outline. They'll send a documentation out to potential tech providers that will cover everything from PAM, wallet, risk, KYC, etc. that we discussed before. We will fill that in, and then at that stage, you go to like a demo stage. They'll start to whittle down the potential tech partners or third parties you'll deal with. If you get past the demo stage, you're usually in a statement of work stage. And that's when you start to get down to the commercials and really deciding, right, is this the viable partner? And that theme continues even when an operator is off the ground and active for 3 years. I've got one of my operators at the minute is about to go up for a 3-year renewal on their feeds and on their KYC partner and different things. They're going through that whole process again. They've had their 3 years. They know what's worked, what hasn't worked, and they're now trying to revisit. Do we need to switch a provider in this part, or is there a particular league where we have a lot of leakage, or we're shedding money because of inefficiencies? And the process at the very start is not too dissimilar to the ongoing process. Once you're live, you're constantly looking for new partners. You're constantly looking to scrutinize the partners you have and make sure you're holding them to account. So it's very much a repetitive nature, but exciting at the same time.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. Out of curiosity, what are the biggest differences between running a sports book in North America versus running one in Europe?
Probably going to sound a little bit like Trent Hale and stuff here, but a lot of the same themes he will have mentioned before, or other colleagues you would have had on, or counterparts you've had on from the UK and Ireland, or the European space. The market maturity, for one, for sure. Without the arrogance that some European operators will display, they have been doing it for 20, 30 years in the space. So that with that comes a market maturity, and it comes a maturity in terms of what the product looks like, what the expectation is from the bettors and the gamblers, what the regulatory stability looks like. If I contrast that with the North American market, it is a regulatory mess. The state-by-state variation alone is bad enough, but then there's so many other factors within the regulatory side that is just to the detriment of the North American market versus what the European markets do. Naturally, the different sports interests and a little bit of different behavior. A lot of betting in the UK and Ireland, for example, and Europe in general, has sort of transitioned towards live betting and in-play betting a lot more quickly than the traditional American market post-PASPA has. That is starting to change. We're definitely seeing a shift towards the micros and towards the in-play markets, but for the UK and Irish market, that's been well established for quite a while. And obviously we have I guess we are facing some hurdles, if you like, in the UK and Irish space and the European space that I think will come in North America in another 3-4 years. Yep. And it's scary what you're up against in that time period. Affordability checks in the UK, for example, liquidity just dropping, and a lot of the same themes that you're experiencing to an extent in the North American market right now is definitely playing out in the UK and Irish market and the European market currently.
I think if you were to ask a casual bettor, or just like the average bettor, not even casual, let's say, I think a lot of people assume that once a sports book launches, it's just about setting the odds and taking bets, basically. Like it kind of runs itself. You always hear, Vegas, it wasn't built overnight. It's a printing press. Or what's something that happens behind the scenes that most people don't realize is happening?
I think for me, most of the operators and a lot of the sports books, especially Amelco anyway, we are what we class as feed agnostic. So we may have 4 or 5 different feeds servicing one NBA game or one NHL game. We're not dependent, if you like, on one sportsbook provider providing the odds or providing the graphics or whatever else might be on that front end. The end user will see one set of markets or one match menu or game menu. Behind that might be 4 or 5 different contributors to the odds alone. Like we've got us obviously on the platform side, and some of our trading team will price up some manual markets and specials. You've got the main lines and derivatives might come from a Radar or a Genius, who have the official rights for a certain league. You might have a player prop provider like Swish Analytics, plugged in for the player props. You might have a micro market provider like SimpleBet or Kiro or InVenue providing your micros. And there's just sort of extra layers that come into what that final product looks like versus how many different contributions are coming from multiple different providers to get to that one end product that sits there.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And definitely for those that use products, it would probably be intuitive to them that, they might be at one sports book and the prop betting is the same as another sports book, but everything else is completely different. And that's what Mark is speaking to here a lot of times. Mark, you mentioned a few times now, regulatory hurdles. So I know you have a lot to say on this. How do regulatory hurdles impact sportsbooks, particularly sportsbook launches as well? And do you think regulations in North America are helping or hurting competition in the space?
I think up to now you're probably hearing in my underlying tones and verbiage that I'm not the massive fan of regulation. I'm an advocate for regulation, but you have to understand what you're regulating to be a strong voice for whether it works or doesn't work. Unfortunately, the pace of regulation in the North American market has meant that a lot of the stakeholders involved on the regulatory side and on the compliance side don't actually understand what they are regulating. And that, I would love to sit down with them. I'd love to work with them. And you hear other voices in the industry emerging, if you like, to say we want to sit and talk to regulators and really help them. But there's a lot of naivety and a lot of strong will on their side that, no, we are this state, we are going to do it our way. And then, you go across a border and you have a totally different implication. Now, a person can sign up on one side, sign up on the other. They can move across and they can have a very fluid sports betting experience on one side of the border, and then on the other side of the border they have something totally different. And that can be in every facet. We've seen the edge cases come to the fore in discussions around offering G League players on two-way contracts, or should we offer college props and things like that. You asked me earlier, like, what's the big difference between the UK market or the European market and the American or North American market? As much as the UKGC or MGA or any of the licensees or the regulators within those jurisdictions have their flaws, they do put the trust in the operators to make the judgment call around what should be offered and what shouldn't be offered. I'll give you one very clear working example, and I'll call out the regulator on this one because it was front and center, and I think there was a bit of news about it at the time. We had UEFA Nations League in Michigan. You had just for the benefit, you understand your football and soccer a bit.
I do.
UEFA Nations League emerged out of friendlies not being competitive. Right. So in most states, you will have an approved wagering catalog, what leagues are allowed or what competitions and what level of props or whatever can be permitted for a wager to be placed in that state. Michigan had the night of, I think it was England against Germany in front of 80,000 people, was not permissible because it was classed as UEFA Nations League. It was not listed on their approved wagering catalog, but I could bet on Cambodia against East Timor the same week. Like, totally ludicrous bureaucracy and oversight. That should never happen. And it's interesting, like I look at the AGCO and IGO and stuff in Toronto, they have a completely different way of doing it. They ask the operators to submit a list at the end of the month of everything they've offered, and you list off who the regulated body is or the governing body is for those individual leagues. And again, that process is flawed. That needs tied up in a big way, but it does allow for those kind of cases to not happen and not have issues, because you're putting the control a little bit back to the sports books to say, yeah, we've done our due diligence, we're going to offer that. And ludicrous that England, Germany, front of 80,000 can't be offered, but friendlies in Cambodia and East Timor and things like that could be offered the same week in front of, a few hundred fans, or, third division Lithuanian soccer can be offered, but, England v Germany can't. It's just ludicrous. And unfortunately, that is definitely not in isolation. There are so many cases like that come up. And my biggest frustration on that Michigan one was they wrote to 9 sportsbooks at the time and said they were going to be fined for offering an impermissible event. It's just ludicrous when it is an enhancement on a club or an international friendly.
Yeah, and the game actually has, or the match has some significance as well. It's not like it's completely meaningless. So yeah, I can see that being a frustration. Mark,
sorry, I was just going to say, like, I can go on the problems and the state of the industry. Like, Monopolies is another massive one for me. If, like, I can complain about the regulators and the regulators not understanding what they're regulating, but we have a massive problem with the leagues, and we have a massive problem with the state-by-state variance and the rights holders for the data. We are in a very precarious position on this side of the industry, and as a knock-on effect to the bettors, where in 2 or 3 years, you're only going to have maybe 2 sportsbooks, maybe 3, because all the others are being held to account or being told you must work with official data rights holders to offer our product. Genius Sports paid massive amounts for the NFL. You've got Radar sitting with rights to the NHL, the NBA. They are incompetent when it comes to the actual data collection side of things, but you are forced in certain jurisdictions to partner with them to take their data. Ontario's prime example, not that you're forced there, but you're encouraged to use the NHL official licensee, which is with Sports Radar. The amount of times their data collection has been wrong, or a goalkeeper or a keeper is pulled, you can clearly tell they're covering it off TV pictures. They're not doing the enhanced data collection they're supposed to. We're getting pounded because a goalkeeper's been pulled, and it's very obvious that the totals are going to go over here, or the price is wrong. And they're reacting data feed-wise 2-3 minutes later. Or they send the incorrect goal scorer or assist maker, and we're settling bets off that. But the core data collection is totally wrong or incompetent, or not to the level it should be. The one thing I would love to see is a really active discussion around that. Should sportsbooks, and by default bettors at the end of this, be suffering and have to pay over the odds for data collection in stadiums, instead of making that space much more competitive? Because that will drive innovation. That will drive people to be more held to account. At the moment, the advantage on that side is 100% with your advantage players. It's 100% for the bettors. And then we have the full circle conversation. Well, if they have a clear advantage over us because we have to use the data rights, but they can use the eye test, or they can see that's, we're still offering a prop on over 0.5 goals on hockey because the data collection is wrong, but the regulator insists we have to use them. All of a sudden, that customer, that bettor, becomes limited. That could have been a very good long-term customer, but by default, we are forced into the limitation discussion, and it's horrible. I don't want to be there, but it's unfortunately the nature of this side of it at the minute.
This is a fascinating conversation because I've lived through a lot of these experiences firsthand. I do bet a lot of hockey. Some of the biggest edges I've ever had in hockey in my life were around live situations with goalie pulls, where sometimes you'd even be watching on TV and the goalie would be coming out of the net, and still the sportsbook was offering a price on like the puck line, -1.5, which was as if the goalie was still in the net. It was really weird situations like that. This provides a lot of context. I mean, I've told this story before many times, Mark, on this podcast. I'll tell it really shortly, but I was at a PointsBet Christmas party a couple years back. PointsBet still operates as PointsBet in Ontario, Fanatics right in the US, but there were regulators there from the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, AGCO. It was right around the time where there was a MMA coach who was betting on or against his fighter. Couldn't remember exactly what it was, but Ontario pulled UFC fighting.
All the UFC,
right? And they were saying that, well, the governing body for the UFC is the UFC themselves. It's not like other sports leagues. It's just the UFC. We cannot uphold the integrity of the UFC events. Meanwhile, everybody is now going back to place bets offshore for the events where they can't place them in a regulated market. And it's like, sometimes we just need to use some common sense here. Like, it is a professional league. There was a one-off incident, but there was like no rational explanation. I mean, you ask regulators, they say the number one goal is to get as much money from offshore, underground, PPH accounts into the regulated market. We want people betting regulated, and then you're taking markets away because of, one-off incident, and everybody's just running back to offshore.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, the edge cases dictate the narrative, and that becomes the prominence. It's the UFC coach. It is the G League player that does something nefarious. It's the college team that have suspicious betting. There's 350 plus other college teams that aren't coming up in any integrity radars. Why are we hyper focused on the one edge case and letting that drive the narrative that all of a sudden we shouldn't be able to offer college props, instead of looking at the 95% that have no issues, no integrity concerns, and that people and bettors enjoy betting? We're coming into March Madness. We enjoy player props. We enjoy SGPs. We're going to have a little bit of a recreational punt, or potentially you're going to play a little bit more recreationally because it's March Madness. But now you're limited on the sports books where you want to bet, or the sports books won't allow you to do it. You're going to just drive that money offshore again. And with respect to the offshore and, let's say, the sweepstakes models and certain other PPHs and everything else, the money's still flowing there. The money is still flowing there, and it will continue to come back there in the next 2 to 3 years if there is not a serious conversation around the data collection, around people who understand the nuances of the sports dictating the direction of the industry, not people on the regulatory side or people with vested interests who are going to be the culprits in the end whenever there is government hearings and people are wondering why are we not getting the returns from the industry that we were anticipating. It's clear and obvious to the likes of me and you right now, but it's not clear and obvious to the people who are actually regulating. And in fairness, we've got cases where the Massachusetts Gaming Board and some others are really actively engaging in that conversation, but then they're doing another action on the side, or another department within that is doing something that's completely in contravention.
I'm really worried about that, Mark. Like, I've heard the stuff about not offering prop bets anymore, and and that's the problem. There are betting groups out there. There's American Bettors Voice. It's run by Spanky, a few others as well, where I've talked about this before, and I appreciate that there's people that are advocating for the bettor out there. Should everyone have fair and equal limits? I believe that they should. Right now they don't, but I like that there is someone advocating for the bettor. But you run the risk of going back to regulators now, and you have people who are not really well versed in how sports betting works, who are now going to take away these discussions and they're going to make rulings. I hear stuff like, just let's take prop betting off the board type of, and I'm like, where did this come from? Like, this wasn't even discussed at any other level. And I really fear that a lot of people are trying to do good for the space might end up having the inverse effect where there's like over-regulation at some point.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I don't expect the bettor to empathize with the sports books. I don't expect Joey Knish all of a sudden to go, oh, I'm on the side of the sports books here. The sports books, we're going to support them. Like, I fully comprehend and understand the world that it is sportsbook versus bettor, but there are a lot happening on this side of the fence that there probably just isn't visibility to the general sports bettor out there. The higher operator taxes, you've got states that, the barrier for entry was respectable, and you had a number of providers entering that space. Now, all of a sudden, you look at New York and they're going, oh, a 51% tax rate, we'll have a bit of that. The prices get worse, the product gets worse, the data fees and the leagues drive up the charges and the costs. All of a sudden, everything goes back offshore. Like, people, if we're at the point post-PASPA where it's now culturally acceptable to bet, those people will find somewhere else to bet now. It's whether it's sweepstakes, whether it's offshore, whether it's crypto books, that will organically happen. And I just think it's going to come 2, 3 years, 4 years down the line, and the regulators are going to realize too late, and we're going to be left with 4 or 5 players in the market, in the regulated market. And yeah, it's too late at that point. It's too late for product innovation. It's too late for competitive pricing. It's too late for those discussions. The money is still going offshore.
In the market right now, we pretty much have 2 different types of models. We have what I'll call, the Circa model of risk management, where it's take bigger bets, hold a lower percentage, there's obviously profiling happening behind the scenes, but not profiling with the sense of cutting limits for certain players. And then you have more of the recreational model, obviously the Draftkings, MGM type of model, which is pretty high level of risk management, cut anyone with a pulse type of thing. There is kind of a hybrid there as well with, I would say, like FanDuel's a sort of a hybrid type of model where they give a little bit of a higher bet, maybe less likely to limit customers. From your experience, what do you think is the right balance between, risk management, profiling customers, and offering just a competitive product as a whole?
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, if I look, my answer might be different to an Adam Bjorn or a Matthew Trenhale or an Alan Berg or other people who run sportsbooks, maybe Jeff Benson. They might have very different answers to me. Number one out of that list, if you like, is competitive product. If you don't have an attractive product, nothing else matters. Yeah. Number 2, risk management, ensuring sustainable profit without suffocating the customer base. And then number 3 is the customer profile at the end of it. It's important, but often misused as the excuse to limit players. So from my side, the competitive product as a foundation is absolutely key. The difficulty in this industry and on this side of the fence is people consider a competitive product to be how quickly can you copy what Draftkings and FanDuel are doing. Right. There's very little innovation in the space right now that differentiates the product and offers something different or niche. And unfortunately, and we're guilty of it at Amelco too, where we will get to the point where the customers, when I say customers, the operators we work with, the partner operations that we work with, they will see something on a Draftkings or a FanDuel and say, oh, we want that. And then we'll go through the development cycle, which might take 2 to 3 sprints, might be 5-6 weeks, might be 5-6 months. By the time we get to the release of that product feature that's already on Draftkings or FanDuel, they're on to the next innovation, and they're dictating the pace of innovation within the industry. So one thing is to have a competitive product. Yeah. But if the benchmark is constantly against the 2 guys who have the most money and the most, the biggest teams and the ability to consume simple bet like Draftkings did, or be able to really carve out a niche like FanDuel have done on the player prop side, where people are digging to FanDuel now. They're not looking at Pinnacle or Bookmaker or whatever. They're digging to FanDuel. Like that, in fairness to them, they are doing that, and it's working for them. But our benchmark should not just be those 2 books. Our benchmark should be how do we differentiate? And in fairness to Hard Rock and Fanatics, they've tried to do something a bit different, I think, in the space. But I'd say if you were sitting in those stakeholder meetings, it's a lot of the same themes. They're still going to ask, well, we've seen a different layout for player cards on Draftkings. How do we achieve that, or how do we do that? And I'm sure our competitors in this space, when I say our competitors, like Camby, for example, Amelco sort of built a foundation of very quickly modulating what we deliver. So as I said before, we can do PAM, we can do sportsbook, we can do risk management services. We modulated all that. That's what probably got us the FanDuel deal, Hard Rock deal, and some others associated with that, because you didn't necessarily have to take our PAM. You could just take our sportsbook or vice versa. We've now seen Camby, for example, who are a much, much bigger entity in operation, but are now offering modulated services, if you like, to go up against Amelco to make sure that they can get into Hard Rock with one pricing feed, or they can get into Fanatics to work with them. And it's tricky. The balance is difficult. I think the risk management side, again, I've touched on it. We are judged very, very quickly. And you've had Shipper on here who prided himself, and I have a lot of time for Shipper, but you had him on here and he prided himself on how quickly he could restrict the customer based on 1 or 2 bets. And that is not the benchmark that me or my team or this industry on this side of the fence should be aiming for. We need to be leading the conversation about how do we improve the feed, the latency, the price sensitivity. How do we improve all that to ensure we do get to a position where we can offer equal and fair limits? Circuit model, I'm a big advocate for what Prime Sports are doing, which is pretty much piggybacking off the BetCris or bookmaker lines. But Adam Bjorn and the team there have done fantastic work to really carve out a niche. But by their own admittance, they're carving out a niche because they're openly arbing themselves to the sport trade exchange, or they're providing something that I think has legs and definitely has a space in this ecosystem. But they don't have to offer all the bells and the whistles. We talked about the syndicate side earlier. So many syndicates, StarLizard included, have moved into this B2B world, if you like, where they're offering services now to sportsbooks. The big difference in the syndicate world is you have to pick and choose your spots, your edges. It's very much like the top-down or bottom-up bettors, the sharps. You can pick your spots. On the product side, the expectation is you have to offer everything. So it's not hard to find the flaws and the holes. Circuit, to their credit, Prime, to their credit, you can book like an old school Vegas bookmaker when you don't have to offer the bells and the whistles. But the expectation of the recreational punter or the recreational bettor that you want to pull across to your sportsbook, they have the expectation that you're doing SGPs, that you're doing cash out, that you're doing the deep menu above and beyond the spreads, the money lines, the totals, and a couple of player props.
Yeah.
I think there's a world where both can coexist. And my dream is that, an Amelco sportsbook at some point marries those two sufficiently where we can get away from having to work exclusively with data rights holders, or we can get in the ear of regulators to say, actually, we are not going to take Genius, or we are not going to take Radar. And I have friends over there. I hope they're not too bad at me calling them out. But by their own admittance, there is elements of their product that is subpar. And the theme carries over to the sportsbook side. There's elements of sportsbooks is subpar because so many people strive for market entries, or this state might add iGaming at some point. So we're going to introduce a shit product and limit customers just so as we can hang around. When the iGaming is legalized, then, oh, well, pat on the back. We can either sell on the business or we can now, scale at a much bigger level. So it's unfortunate. The pace post-PASPA has been significant, but it's led to a lot of inefficiencies. And by default, the bettor expects more. And I totally empathize with that. But also the platforms and the sportsbooks, for the most part, if you're on my side of the fence, you want to take a bet. You want to raise a limit. You don't want to limit customers. Pass posters or courtsiders or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's different. And that's, unfortunately, you probably watched or picked up on the Massachusetts Gaming Board when they invited people to come along and speak, both from the sportsbooks and from the sports betting side. I think you had Joe Brennan on there at the time from the sports betting side and a few other advocates. But unfortunately, every sportsbook that went on there, with the exception, I think, of Caesars, had legal or compliance doing the discussions. Not traders, not people who have to manage the customers, people reading off scripts. And that, again, is a really poor reflection on this side of the industry. We've got a lot of passionate folk. We've got a lot of talent across various companies. But we're stuck in the shadows, if you like, and not being the advocates for the direction this industry should go.
Yeah, I forgot that happened, but that was pretty sad to see. Just every sportsbook issuing a statement beforehand, and I mean, that's not gonna get the industry anywhere. We've had a lot of operators that have struggled in market. There's many that come to my mind. There's Fubo, WinBet, PlayUp, Betfred recently. In Ontario, CoolBet made a very quick exit from the regulated market. So lots of these books are pulling back. I'm listening to you talk, and I've had these conversations with other people before, and a lot of them just think it's related to marketing and the fact that, well, DraftKings, FanDuel, Underdog, Prize Picks, MGM, these companies have a lot of money behind them. They can market themselves. My belief is that these products are just not good enough. I mean, you can't enter the space with a product that has like no differentiating factor to these other big books and hope to compete. And I'm curious of your thoughts on that. What do you make of these operators that have quickly pulled out of the space in the last few years?
There's no one rule to fit all. I'll say that. And quite rightly, you've named three that were on Amelco tech stacks that are no longer with us. And Fitzdares in Canada is going to be another very shortly as well, where they're going to withdraw from the market. Thriving in the UK and Ireland on the platform there, but yeah, the Canadian space has just not worked out for them when they're up against 29, 30 other sportsbooks, and there is no differentiation in terms of what you're offering. I'll reflect a little bit on the three that I kind of experienced firsthand, if you like. PlayUp, case study in poor market fit and naivety. So PlayUp for me, a lot of friends were involved on the US side of the operation, and still in touch with them, still have a lot of time for them. They entered two very, very competitive marketplaces, New Jersey and Colorado, with a generic recreational product. And their ambition on the US side was to offer good limits, respectable limits, but there's no way that you can sustain that in those two marketplaces against a very sharp and shrewd user base when you're running a recreational feed. And when I say recreational feed, the commercials are done beforehand. You sign up to take what's called a unified odds feed from Sports Radar. You're then beholden to what Sports Radar offer as your odds. Now you can do biasing, you can override, you can switch the lines, but your source of truth is a poorly executed odds feed from a third-party provider. So the culture was right in terms of what they wanted to achieve on the US operations. They brought in Rex, and I know Rex is chalk and cheese in terms of some people like him, some people don't. To his credit, I think Rex has so many positive aspects, and his passion for the industry cannot be faulted at all. Joe Rogers and Mike Roselli and some other guys that were involved there, they really had a drive to do it correctly, but they were fighting not just the battle of those two states and trying to book there with recreational feeds, but also their overlords, if you like, on the Australian side of the business. There was too many people, and some of the other sportsbooks are guilty of this as well. They thought they could make a quick buck by obtaining licenses that you could potentially piggyback into iGaming down the line, and then make a quick buck by selling on. And it speaks volumes for me that, a few weeks before PlayUp blew up, if you like, Sam Bankman-Fried was seen as the savior and was going to come in and sort it out, and then we all know how that played out. So internal dysfunction, poor product, and lack of investment in the product side, and more obsession with obtaining licenses in states that they had no rights, because with a sort of distraction and obtaining those licenses for more states without getting the bread and butter states, the first two that were in, correct, and pay, investing in that and investing in upscaling. Like, just to give context on that one, we run in sprint cycles on the development side on the B2B. Our version that was in PlayUp in New Jersey and in Colorado was about 18 months behind the version that we're rolling out to Saracen Casino in Arkansas, purely because they just weren't paying the bills, or they paying bills late and things like that. And I don't want to get into too much discussion. It's dead and buried now, but the obsession with making the quick buck from entering the market, getting the licenses, and then making the quick buck of selling those on, there was no care or duty of care to the actual people working for the company and other things. And I can't blanket all the Australians that were involved in that project the same way, because my trading counterparts over there were lovely and had weekly calls with them, and it was great. It's just the exec level, if you like, just not understanding the marketplace, very naive, and unfortunately that one fell by the wayside. Sorry, Rob, I don't know if you were say something, but I'll just contrast that with the likes of Fubo and WinBet. Fubo, really strong vision, too much bureaucracy. That's how I'd sum it up, and poor guidance. So they had some very talented young people behind the vision for what that sportsbook could have become. And I think if you look at like Sky Bet in the UK, and if they had really driven the direction that way and embedded their product into their rights that they had for streaming games and have that dual screen experience, I think they could have done something significant in this space. They may not have made it long term, but they definitely had a vision. But then they brought in consultants and they brought in people who don't understand, and they made a few switches. And again, when it's a publicly listed company, people will say, well, we've bought 4 licenses for these states. I think they got up to 7 licenses they acquired. So they were paying the overheads for that. And then they said, well, the regulator says we have to work with Genius. We're going to offer Genius odds. And I have this conversation all the time with every new operator I work with and every current operator I work with. Outside of 1 or 2 states, Tennessee being one, you can take an official data rights deal with Genius.
Yep.
That does not mean you have to take odds from Genius. Unfortunately, so many of those commercials are signed with the naivety that, oh, this means I must take Genius odds or I must take Radar odds. No, you negotiate a rights deal for the data collection in stadium. I have a very strong view on it that if you do the deal right, they should not be entitled to a penny of rev share on pre-match markets because we're not using their data for pre-match markets.
Right. Yeah.
But unfortunately, on the commercial landscape, all those deals are signed not by traders, not by people who understand the sportsbook mechanics, and it's to the detriment again. And again, Tennessee, for example, trying to enforce this ruling that you must use official data and not other providers and things. It's to the detriment. Last one I'll mention, and I know I'm going off on a tangent a little bit. WinBet, again, so frustrating because they've had the best trading team that I've worked with hand in hand. So at that stage, Alan Berg, Matt Lindemann, Motoy Pearson, fantastic trading team. They were not engaged as stakeholders when it came to product innovation and development and everything else. They rushed to market. You know, they kept the outdated tech stacks, not just on Amelco. We ran the sportsbook in Michigan and had some fun with Joey Kanish's bets and things there. But they had such excellent internal stakeholders there who knew what the betting public would want, knew what products and feeds and everything else would gravitate with them. But the obsession at the executive level was, we need market access. We need to go into another state and another state and another state. In that process, they're not reinvesting in the states that they're already in. They're more obsessed with getting the next license and the next market entry. When they bit the bullet, if you like, and took on the New York market, everything else kind of died a death because the costs associated with that. And they had for example, they partnered or they bought BetBull in the UK. That book, we had operations, I'd say, for 3 months, and then they shut it down because of the losses they were making in the North American market. That sportsbook was doing respectable enough sort of tier 2, tier 3 level handle day to day. Like, they were doing very good horse racing business, very good football business. The Win executives, the BetBull executives just didn't understand, and they just cut it and reinvested that into the US market. So a lot of stuff behind the scenes that most of your listeners would never be aware of. There's no one size fits all into why an operator falls away or disappears from the marketplace. And I don't think it's down to just marketing. I don't think it's down to any one thing, but the underlying theme of all three of those is too much bureaucracy and too many people trying to enter this space to make a quick buck rather than having some sort of sustainable long-term customer relationship. You know, if they had really focused in on the 2 or 3 states that they were operating in and not try to, you know, chase this mass expansion into new states, lock down your potentially 30-40% market share in one state, build the organic reputation off that. And unfortunately, that's just not the culture that has been post-PASPA. It's been a race to the next state, the next state, the next state.
I'll get you back to Circles Off with Mark Hill in just a second here, but first, I do want to tell you about Edge Boost. And I'll admit it, when I first heard about a gambling credit card, I was skeptical. But after seeing multiple members of our Hammer team start using Edge Boost and raving about it, I decided to dig in deeper. And now I see why they swear by it, because Edge Boost isn't just another payment option. It's a dedicated bank account built specifically for sports betting, for DFS, casinos, and sweepstakes. No more declined transactions, no more frozen accounts, just seamless deposits and withdrawals every single time. The Edge Boost Visa debit card is where this really shines. You can move up to $250K per day, and you can also earn cash back on every single deposit. So for a bettor wagering $5K to $10K per week, that can mean an extra $50 to $100 back every single week. I've seen firsthand how much our team relies on Edge Boost. It's reliable, it's efficient, it's designed to make managing your bankroll easier. And with March Madness right around the corner, now is the perfect time to try it out. Don't risk running into deposit issues when it matters most. Sign up to Edge Boost using the link down in the description below. Now back to Circles Off. Where do you see the sports industry heading over the next few years?
I think just following up on my last point about, the potentially smaller sportsbook entities dropping out of the space, I think consolidation is inevitable, unless there is a change of trajectory on the regulatory side, the data collection side, and so on. The rising cost, the increased tax, the overregulation, current trajectory favors monopolies, and it's just, we're at the point where, unfortunately, we're at a crossroads. Like, we can get it right, or its history repeats itself. You look at the sweepstake models, you look at crypto sportsbooks, you look at the offshores sort of not necessarily reestablishing themselves, but having trust and stability in that space. The regulated space is going to become more and more constricted, and we're not going to have the product innovation that we're desiring. We're not going to have stuff really come to the fore and make us a better product. And as such, it's going to really drop away. Inevitably, at some point, California and Texas will regulate and everything will be fine again. Everyone will go, this is the next boom.
Yeah.
And it will paper over the cracks for a little bit longer. And, maybe we'll have the provinces emerge in Canada even and have all them on their own, regulated space instead of it being Ontario and then everybody else. So I think there will still be enough narratives to dictate and say, oh, we're fine. There's another new market opening up. There's more new sports books emerging, but they'll not last very long, and they'll be left by the wayside very quickly, and we'll be left with not just the sports book operations having limited scope, but the sports bettors forced into taking money elsewhere and playing elsewhere. Or, if we're talking about just general share of wallet, that share of wallet's going to go into fantasy leagues. It's going to go into other vices rather than staying in the affordable, regulated sports betting space.
Right. There are still books that are making pushes into sports betting in markets that have been established, like Ontario now. We still see new books that are coming into market every now and then, other U.S. states as well. Do you hold out any hope that any of these books will be able to compete with the likes of FanDuel and Draftkings? Or do you think that it's just like, it's too far gone at this point, they're too late to the party? What do you see as the future of these books that are now trying to make a push into sports betting?
Probably going to sound pretty biased in that I do think Fanatics and Hard Rock have got the foundations in place now to really become more competitive than they are. And that slow incremental market growth has been encouraging. Now, yes, there's been substantial overheads to achieve that initial launch and that initial growth.
Right.
However, DraftKings and FanDuel have also in tow had significant overheads on marketing and acquisitions and everything else associated with that. So I'm not totally glass half empty that it's only going to be FanDuels and DraftKings of this world. I think, the best position to challenge is Fanatics and Hard Rock for me, but it has to be a long game for them. Fanatics, obviously diversification there. They can cross-sell across different verticals and have a sustainable customer base and a potential customer base that DraftKings and FanDuel might not have exploited yet or utilized yet. And again, if Texas, California, et cetera, comes along, there's really an in there for them to be potentially in the door quickly and potentially lead that space. Hard Rock, for all the flaws, and I've been quite derogatory around monopolies in the betting industry. I know that everyone will look on at Florida and the Seminole tribe and think that is restrictive for the business. And I think you'll find people at Hard Rock probably nodding their head and saying, yeah. But in credit to Hard Rock, behind the scenes, since they've got off the ground in Florida and they obviously have the cash flow associated with that, they are reinvesting that heavily in personnel and heavily in product. And a lot of the other ones that you might class in that top 5, top 6, what are Penn and ESPN doing? What are MGM doing? They're chaotic behind the scenes. Fanatics to their credit, Hard Rock to their credit, I'm seeing a lot of stability and I'm seeing a lot of reinvestment in the product, reinvestment in the direction they want to go. And they're not obsessed with, chasing license after license. Yes, they're getting into these states and yes, they're getting licenses, but they're reinvesting the money to ensure the long-term stability of the companies, in contrast to an MGM or a Penn or an ESPN. Like, I listen to a lot of podcasts in this space, and I listen to Joe Brennan and Adam Bjorn on the Prime Sports podcast regularly. They often mention ESPN. It's like they dropped the ball, massively dropped the ball, whenever Penn, Barstool, whatever, got that brand of ESPN, and they've done jack shit, excuse my French, with it.
Yeah.
It's like, how can you monumentally F up something so potentially perfect? Like, the misguidance, the misdirection of that is crazy. Instead of trying to compete with FanDuels and Draftkings of this world, they're just sleepwalking into irrelevance, and they'll be gone sooner or later. Yep. They might have the piggyback of the iGaming side, and maybe that will give them a sustainable base. But at the minute, unless they change trajectory, they're gone. So those are the big four, if you like. And then, like, I'm naturally going to give credit to the Circa, the Prime Sports, and dare I say even Caesars on this one, where you've got them targeting or having the perception that they're willing to take a bet. Obviously, Circa and Prime speaks for themselves. Caesars reputationally are better than most of those vanilla, tier 2, tier 3 operators. They're willing to take a bet for the most part. They're fighting the good fight, if you like, on the pricing side, and that allows them differentiation. And I still think we're going to get to the point where, in another 2-3 years, they will still be competitive. They will still be in the space because they're offering what the offshores can offer. They're willing to take a bet, and they're willing to move a line and move a number and be dynamic. And I think given that 2-3 year lead in time, I do expect Circuit to re-enhance some of the product and add some of those bells and whistles that other sportsbooks have. Prime, you hear Planetech and Adam Bjorn talking about what their vision is, that they will add incrementally the bells and the whistles. They've got the foundation, they've got the customer base now. Yes, very small market share in the grand scheme of things, but they're trending in the right direction, whereas a lot of these others in the tier 2, tier 3 space are just copying the Draftkings and the FanDuel. What I'll add on that is Draftkings and FanDuel, for all their sins, they're not resting too much on their laurels. You look at what FanDuel have done. We mentioned earlier around the, trying to carve out a niche on the player prop front. I think it's 95% of SGPs that we have, like placed on our sports books, contain a player prop. Right. If they are really carving out the niche as being competitive in that space, and their SGP pricing is also starting to garner, the Eilers and Krejcik reputation of being better on the SGP front, they will do just fine. Like, they're going to do just fine. DraftKings, for me, the history of DraftKings is interesting, and certainly on the sportsbook state. Like, if you think about where they both came from and how they became disruptors in the space and everything else, and you mentioned before about like sweepstakes and crypto casinos, they're the disruptors now, if you like, and to an extent, Circa and Prime Sports are somewhat of disruptors. Like, DraftKings and FanDuel are still going to dominate because FanDuel are getting it right, and DraftKings are just acquiring everyone else who's getting it right. So Simple Bet, for example, on the micro betting front, that acquisition, if Caesars, ourselves, multiple other sports books, Hard Rock, Fanatics, we're all using Simple Bet for their micros. DraftKings come along and purchase that, they can then shut off the other operators. Now, don't get me wrong, that leads to innovation and more micro providers emerging.
Right.
But it's not isolated to just that micros. They purchase Mustard Systems, which is a London-based company, or again, almost like the syndicate side. They do sensitive pricing, particularly around golf, and have really innovated their golf pricing product. Another niche and another sport that I think is ripe for sports betting, and nobody's really tapping into that. If DraftKings get that right in the near future, again, they're built on like their background, if you like, on the tech stack is SB Tech. So they've gone to market similar to Hard Rock and Fanatics in its infancy, where they've kind of taken a source code deal. In fact, they just purchased SB Tech and built upon that. But they're now at the point where they've reached their confines in the back office. They're now going, right, we'll just buy this one, we'll buy that one. And whether it's Jason Robbins or the execs, they've somebody who's sharp enough to identify where the trends are going, and they're consuming, the M&A space. They're consuming the right people to take on. So in short, I think that domination will continue, but I've respect for the two that we have worked with, and Fanatics and Hard Rock. I think they're trying to achieve it right. I think MGM and Penn are disastrous, and then Circa, Prime, and Caesars are the other three that I kind of have my eye on and going, yeah, I like what you're doing. You're trying to disrupt, and you're trying to do it the right way. And I think that's the foundation of a sportsbook I'd want to run if I was running one from scratch.
All right, let's say you are starting a new sportsbook from scratch today. What would be your number one priority if you were doing that?
There's the cliched answer, and there's the genuine answer on the actual sportsbook side. The cliched answer is your first 5 hires are everything. The right people make or break a sportsbook. We've talked about the failures already. We've talked about why those companies have failed, and it's been an underlying misdirection from the top. I've name dropped some people that I think are fantastic in this industry. They are usually behind the scenes. They know where a sportsbook should go, and anyone that's starting up or anyone that is acquiring a sportsbook, let's say Penn or Acquire or ESPN or whatever, and they want to just rip it up and redo it, you've got to build it with the right stakeholders, and that's across the various departments or iterations. So there's definitely, if you're launching a sportsbook and your first 5 hires aren't absolutely nailed, you're already dead in the water. Don't be another copy-paste recreational sportsbook. Be a disruptor. I've mentioned a few already. It's like most new sportsbooks are just variations of the same old safe model, right. Low risk, plug and play, zero differentiation. It's like you can't do that if you want to start a sportsbook in 2025. Price and competitiveness, like I'm trying to change it at Amelco. And I've been very open and transparent about that we have an over-reliance and a burden, if you like, on the risk management side, or we're having to firefight a lot of mistakes made by the feed providers. If I was starting a new sportsbook from scratch, I would want to do the data collection myself if it's achievable, or work with partners who are competent or open to competition in that space, to allow us the ability to price in-house, run their data through the model, and have faith in what's being offered, because then we can offer better limits. We don't have to be perceived as another vanilla sportsbook. And yeah, being just competitive on those pricing, I deviate away from this mentality that you must hang 20-cent and 30-cent lines. We need, unfortunately, it's a hangover from the old school industry in North America. I want to be more competitive on margin. I don't want to just offer 10-cent, 20-cent, 30-cent lines, or in some instances, people offering 40, 50. We shouldn't be as restrictive on margination, and then price competitiveness. The underlying theme for me, though, if I was starting it, is you have to become an originator. And that origination might not be market beating, but you need to have an underlying confidence in the ability to originate a number and understand where that market's going. At the moment, if I'm a sportsbook operator and I limit every customer under the sun that has a pulse, I don't get to see their business going forward. Circa can, Prime can, offshores can. They can tag those customers. They understand those customers. On the recreational sportsbook side, they just open up another account and another account and another account. If we have that open and transparent relationship from day one, and we originate our own pricing, which we're doing at Amelco now on a couple of sports in particular, we now can dictate and understand where that market is going to go. You can see the manipulation of the market making books. We talked about Circa. It doesn't take much to manipulate Circa's NBA lines, for example.
Nope.
It doesn't take much to influence Prime Sports number or BetCris number. It certainly doesn't take much to influence Pinnacle's number these days. If you are originating your price behind the scenes, you can just ignore that market move because you have faith in whether it is directionally correct or not correct. That all of a sudden opens up a whole plethora of new business, because you're welcoming the ARBs, you're welcoming the bets that most sports books will just shy away from and say, okay, we're profiling this customer. He's got a plus EV bet against the competitors at that time. And yeah, so for me, originating the pricing, it's not an overnight thing either. You've got to reinvest in the personnel. Again, not to go off on a tangent too much, like at Amelco, one of my biggest headaches, if you like, as a trading director when I joined the company, was that we had a quant division or an algo team, but they didn't have the domain knowledge behind the sports. And that's across all sports, not just even the European side. They were mathematicians. They were very competent developers. They were what you'd call quant developers. They weren't quant analysts.
Right.
So like last year, or sort of started this year, we spun up a quant division. I brought in guys from StarLizard. I brought in guys from Smart Odds, and we're building something on the pricing side that if it ever did come to the point where we were going B2C and maybe wanted to open our own sportsbook, we are very well positioned now from a pricing side of things to do that. The difficulty I have, and I'm sure people at Amelco and other companies have this headache all the time, and we've seen Fitzdares, for example, withdraw from or about to withdraw from that regulated market in Ontario where you're against 29 books. They will go off and apply for other licenses in other jurisdictions, not necessarily in North America, but that license will allow them to move into potentially grey space or potentially other B2C areas. If I really got the sportsbook off the ground and was building it from scratch and I had the right personnel and I had the right price and dynamics, am I going to open that sportsbook in the North American landscape right now, or am I going to open that sportsbook in the grey space? And unfortunately, with everything that we've talked about, I'm going to open that sportsbook in the crypto space, or I'm going to open that sportsbook in the offshore space, because the regulated space is making it too restrictive, too costly to actually innovate and launch a new sportsbook. So long-winded answer, but hopefully you get kind of the direction I'm going on it.
No, I get it. And even if we look at exchanges nowadays, a lot have pivoted to the sweepstakes model to avoid a lot of the regulation that's happening in the space. And you brought up the sweepstakes model a couple of questions ago. How do you see the exchanges within the current ecosystem? Like, do you consider some people consider exchanges to be the way of the future. At some point, everyone's going to be on exchanges. It's great pricing, peer-to-peer. I love the idea of an exchange. I don't see it as the way of the future, but I love it. Where do you see them within the ecosystem?
It won't happen in the North American market, like not in that regulated space until there is some sort of boundary broke down. Maybe Trump and Elon will do it. The Wire Act alone is a major roadblock. Without some federal reform, you're never going to get exchanges off the ground. If we got to a world where all 50 states, you could have an open and transparent exchange, and you could have peer-to-peer betting across the whole jurisdiction, or let's say 30 of the states. Maybe we'll add in the 51st state of Canada again if Trump gets his way. But if you were able to do peer-to-peer exchanges on that kind of scale, yes, the discussion is there. We can say exchanges could be the future, and they will drive the sportsbook again to be more innovative or more competitive on pricing. But until there is a change in that framework, until there is a recession or a lessening of the Wire Act, it's simply just not going to take off. And I look at we work with a lot of partners who seed exchanges at the minute. I don't mind mentioning like DL Trading and people like that who are assisting us on player props at the minute. Like I sit with David and we talk about product innovation on the sportsbook side. They are also seeding, the exchanges and Sport Trade and some of the others that are out there. You've seen ProfitX have to sort of move away from that model.
Yep.
Because they're restricted to one state, one jurisdiction, and you're competing against the sportsbooks, yes, but you're not able to actively encourage the peer-to-peer element unless you are Rufus and DL, for example, going head-to-head on a golf market. It's what kind of encouragement is that to the recreational bettor to go and enter that market and play on an exchange? I think there's, like I've seen it in the UK firsthand, there is definitely merit in exchange betting, but again, it cannot be as restrictive as it is currently to really grow organically and allow a recreational punter to understand what they're actually betting or why price sensitivity matters or the ability to lay a bet. It's totally different dynamic. It requires a lot of education. It did take off in the UK. Betfair has a very strong reputation, but it's not the Betfair of old anymore, as you're probably aware. We're up against affordability checks in the UK. It has killed the industry over there on the exchange side. You've got Matchbook, you've got BetDAC, you've got others in that space, but the liquidity is just not there. If I want to go bet the NBA in the UK, I physically can't at a regulated book. I'm limited at every recreational sports book, and the exchange has zero liquidity. So where am I going to place my NBA bets? If I want to make them, I have to go through an agent, or I have to go and do them in the traditional offshore sense, because the UK market is not conducive to be able to take those bets because the liquidity is not there anymore. At some point in the future, if DL or if Sescana or whoever else is sort of seeding exchanges on the syndicate side realize, we're just up against our peers and we have an edge here and there, but it's just not, is that 0.5% we're holding worth it, or will we go chase some recreational elsewhere, or go back to our traditional model? They'll just go back to the traditional model.
Right.
Liquidity won't be there, and it'll just die a death again.
I want to kind of pick up on that, but rather than talk about the future of sportsbooks and exchanges, more about the future of sportsbook tech, which we very rarely talk about here on Circles Off. So I've obviously, it's 7 episodes, and it's going to shit. I have consulted for sportsbooks in the past before. I know a little bit about the trading room. Damn, it hurts me to see that 7 on the board going to be reset to a 0 at some point. It was a source of pride for me. But I've talked, remain in contact with many traders who I used to work with. Automation has become a much bigger part of sportsbook operations, especially over the last few years, at least from the people that I talk to. How much trading is still manual versus algorithm driven nowadays?
It's difficult from my perch, given that most of the odds that an Amelco sportsbook will churn out do not originate from Amelco, so to speak. So there's absolutely algo-driven models out there, and the shift from manual trading has been dramatic over the last 5, 6, 7 years. We've got to a point now where, again, the innovators in this space, like what Deck Prism have done in Las Vegas, for example, and then the purchase from Huddle and everything associated there, they are starting to really drive the marrying better pricing and better algorithms with better products and more liquidity and higher limits and everything else. Unfortunately, those that have most of the control of the industry do not. Most of the control of the industry are people who their tech and their algos are about copying the market,
right,
and then rechurning that out. And unfortunately, most of the players copy it slowly and copy it badly. So whilst there has been a shift from human oversight to automation, it's poor automation, it's poor latency. And there are guys that are doing it very well, but there is so much more edge on the better side because you can access multiple tools and you can access multiple odds screens, like not just Betstamp, but obviously it's such a competitive space now. The edge is absolutely with you guys. Don't mind me saying it. I have been hit from pillar to post by some Betstamp employees with the in-play sports betting that the guys were doing in Ontario. It's like the edge is very obvious. It's not hard to play that edge when you have an odds screen that can compare one tech provider who does it very well and is not copying versus everybody else. So we're getting to a more algo-driven line generally with the pricing, but 70 to 80% of the industry is more concerned with how are we copying the market makers or the innovators. Most of them don't know who to copy for a start and copy badly. So a lot of the European startups, or not startups, a lot of the established European operators that moved into the North American space copied Bet365. Bet365's pricing on North American sports is horrendous. They continue 5 years, 6 years later to still copy Bet365. They copy Bet365 slowly. Bet365 and Denise Coates has an absolute monopoly in the grey space. Everyone thinks of the reputation in the UK and Ireland, and right, yeah, they've got a brilliant product. They don't need to be price sensitive because they are doing hundreds of millions and billions in the grey space. A regulated sportsbook who wants to start up in Ontario and copying a sportsbook that does it badly, what is that?
Right.
It's crazy. And unfortunately, even 6, 7 years later, if you're going to copy the market, copy the right market makers. Don't copy the Bet365s, the Sky Bets, the William Hills. Yes, there's certain elements that are good there, but even if I look at I think you'll be aware, but certainly some of your listeners won't be. There are a lot of companies in this space that aggregate odds. So you've got L Sports, TX Odds, companies like that.
Yep.
That their bread and butter has been that aggregator where even the big books, some of the ones we've talked about, the Draftkings, the FanDuels, the Hard Rocks, the Fanatics, the MGMs, there are component parts of their tech stack that just copy the market and copy the market badly using those aggregator services. And it might be for player props or it might be for main lines. There's no one size fits all. If I was personally to set an aggregator, I'd want to say for hockey, for example, that might be off the top of my head, like Jeff Davis or someone like that. I might want a little bit of his influence in. Wouldn't want the full picture from Jeff, but I want a little bit of that in there. I want a little bit of Penny's number. I want a little bit of bookmakers. I want to pick and choose my blends. None of that happens because they're picking and choosing their blends based on poorly copied recreational numbers to begin with, because Pinnacle have moved off screen, or others have moved off screen. It's a ludicrous world, and you've seen it now, I guess, with the whole optic odds and Swish analytics, and it's like all the innovation is happening to the betterment of the customers, of the bettors, and then those innovators are moving a little bit into the B2B world and helping operators, which is great, but it's still so poorly done, but they can get away with it. It's frustrating. I've gone off on a complete trajectory here, but it's like, yeah, automation is here, but the algos need to be driven off the right metrics. And at the moment, this industry, for the most part, does not put the right metrics into the algos to begin with.
Well, we're going to keep going on this topic in 1 second, but what I love what you did, Mark, is you basically did my Betstamp Pro ad read for me, in talking about how the live betting Betstamp users were destroying you. I might be putting words in your mouth, but the live betting is in beta right now. It's being tested around the office. You heard it from Mark himself. The product's pretty good at winning money. Betstamp.com/circlesoff if you want to check it out. We'll put the link in the description down below. There are limited licenses on this product because we don't want to oversaturate the market. We don't want this to turn into odds jam where edges are completely getting blown up. So if you want to check it out, apply now. Betstamp.com/circlesoff. Once the spots are gone, they're gone. Make sure that you check it out. On the automation side, Mark, there's a lot of advancements recently in AI, artificial intelligence. I use AI a lot in my day-to-day life. Makes things pretty easy for me in many aspects, which I don't want to get into. But there's a lot of discussion about AI and machine learning in sports betting in particular. Do you think that there is a point where artificial intelligence will replace human traders?
No, I don't. Look, not in the next 10 to 15, 20 years. Like, we will get to the point where if there is innovation in the match tracking side of things, and everything is tagged on a pitch, and you've got this plethora of data points and information, I do see a world where AI will replace elements of trading that can become driven by 100% automation and machine learning and everything associated with that. However, at the moment, in the current landscape, we are light years away from that. And I have this issue or topic come up. I do an internal monthly trading forum with my entire team where they can go on Slido, ask anonymous questions, and it comes up time after time. There is this concern that they are going to be replaced by AI, or they're going to be replaced by automation, because I'm a massive advocate for it.
Right.
But I try to instill some confidence in them that all that means is that I can reuse their energy resource in a different area. So I don't want to, if I have a team of 50 now, I want that team to be 100 once I've fully developed AI, because I want them to be working on product innovation. I want them to be working with the quant team. I want them to be working on other aspects within this space, rather than feeling their jobs are at risk to be replaced by automation. Automation, like, for a moment, or for the last few years, we've had so much manual lifting to do in our company and as a whole. Automation is paving the way that these talented guys that have brought in, and talented guys that have lost as well, because they've had to do so much manual lifting and so much firefighting, both on the product side and the feed side, they get tired, they get bored, they just get fed up, and they move on. For us, automation is not about replacing personnel. It's about enhancing personnel. And with automation, with AI, with machine learning, I know firsthand that certain companies, certain big companies, are trying to do a black box approach to SGP, for example, and try to really innovate that product. And I would, on the product side, I want to get to the point where the user journey is frictionless. You can combine anything that is on a betting menu, and it will churn out a price. But that comes at a cost, both labor-wise, personnel-wise, etc. Yeah. There's so much potential for innovation, hand in hand with AI. I love it. There's obviously different degrees of AI, but I like yourself, I use it every day for a lot of remits in my life. I've introduced my partner to recently as well, and she's like got a new best friend for her interests and stuff. It's like, but that's that's just the generative AI. It's not the bigger picture of what AI can deliver in the next 5-10 years. So long and short, it's like we should all be embracing it. We should all be engaging with it. It's here to stay. It's here to grow.
Yeah.
You're only as good as the inputters and the feeding that model. And please, anybody in this industry, if your company is saying to you that you're going to be replaced by automation and AI, it's not the right company to be in. That company should be saying, now I can have ABC redirected to focus on enhancing our SGP with, additional testing, or, enhancing the front end, working on CMS, working on, sitting in operator meetings, deciding what next product innovation we're going to do. That's what the company should be directing you to, not saying, oh, we want to just cut the trading team in half. It's not the way we're going.
All right. So AI not going to replace human traders in the next 10 to 15 years, according to Mark. But Mark, I do want to ask, what's one tech advancement that might happen in the next 5 or 10 years that you think could change the industry?
It's a really, really hard one to pinpoint, because I think most of the initial innovation is already happening, like in that micro betting space. And that we have a set of culture in this industry where unfortunately, most of the players, when I say players, the people who run sportsbooks, the execs, the shareholders, they're obsessed with getting the iGaming, the casino. We talked about the contrast earlier between the European market and the sportsbooks and in the North American market. Everyone in the UK and Europe has an iGaming arm. In the US, they don't. But if we are still 5-10 years away from the innovation on that side, then micro betting and really engaging with micro betting and making that experience frictionless and flawless and no latency and no lag, you can replicate a lot of the dopamine inducing hits that a casino type customer could generate. Am I an advocate for it? Do I think it's sustainable and good? Not necessarily, but I would much rather advocate for a product like that keeps it within the sports betting world than throwing it at a casino with a really crap RTP. It's like,
yeah,
that for me, I hope takes off. There are competitors emerging now to simple bet that I think will innovate more, but we're at a point where micro betting is here to stay, and micro betting and in-play betting in particular is going to be more and more the predominant feature. The big thing in the industry, if you like, on the SGP side is SGP Plus, or enhanced SGP, where you can combine SGPs from everywhere. That side of it is riddled with long-term holds, or hold, whatever way you want to look at it, because unfortunately, whenever the public numbers say, FanDuel or Draftkings are saying, oh, we're holding 35%, 40%, that is not long-term disposable income that is sustainable. Micro betting and other types of betting allows for the churn, yes, but also the player experience that they're having wins. They might win 1 in every 3 times, or they might hit lucky streaks. You're not going to hit that on 30-1, 40-1, 50-1 parlays, or dare I say 1,000 to 1, 10,000 to 1 parlays. It's not sustainable, and you will get to a point where they'll only hang around, and they'll deposit on payday, and they will play for a few nights, and then they're done till the next payday, or they just don't return at all. You need to have a culture where you're getting back to the customer as much as you're getting from the customer. And unfortunately, again, we live in a incestuous world where people pry on the customers, and it's not my mentality. A lot of the folks on this side of the industry, it's not their mentality. We wanted a fair and honest competition, a game. So I say micro betting for me, it doesn't sound like I'm being unique in that, but yeah, it's like, it's so much potential if it's done sustainably and right, and just gives that player engagement and enjoyment. Are we going to stop people throwing in 10-leg SGP parlays? No. But if they want the sustained sportsbook experience and share of wallet and player retention, you've got to give them products that allow them to win as close to as often as they lose.
Mark, you've been very generous with your time. I've enjoyed having this conversation. I do want to just chat quickly about March Madness, since it's right around the corner, and you offer a unique, experience and perspective from the sportsbook operation side. So since we're about to start March Madness here, the main tournament tomorrow, how does a major event like this impact trading operations?
Excitement for a start. So you have the cadence of the year where you go through, right, August time, NFL season, NFL preseason, sorry, and then NFL season starting in September. You go right through the Super Bowl, where every day is busy. You've got all the major leagues sort of operating to an extent. You get to Super Bowl, and then it's like, breathe.
Exactly.
You've got that window out of the way. You do have a little bit of a fluctuation and a little bit of a down period, but for most trading floors, and to be honest, on the sports betting side, it's very, very similar. On the better side, you'll take a couple of days to breathe, and then you'll be like, okay, let's start prepping for the majors in golf. Let's start prepping for March Madness. Let's start, looking at the NFL draft or whatever. For us, it's very, very similar in nature. We know we get over that hurdle of getting the Super Bowl out of the way. Nobody wants to release new tech as well during that Super Bowl window, if you like. So once the Super Bowl's out of the way, you'll find a lot of operators will start to release new features in the build up to March Madness. Once you hit week of March Madness, or obviously for us this week, Selection Sunday, and then into the play-in games, and by the time this goes out, we'll be heading towards the tournament starting for proper. Like, it's so exciting because we're seeing constant bet flow. We're seeing days where would traditionally be quiet is just bang, 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 bang. It's exciting for the punters. It's exciting for us on the sportsbook side. And yeah, it makes the day go quicker, and it makes the day go more fun on both sides of the counter. On the sort of, what is the major impact, if you like, on trading operations? You have to be open to unpredictability. You have to be open to high variance. There's quite a few games, but we've got a relative sample size over the course of the season. It could be all blown out the window on day one. And it's like trying to explain that again to the sports books and just let them ride the waves of the variance that is associated with the March Madness tournament is part and parcel of it.
From a trading perspective, what's the hardest part of managing liability during a tournament like this? Because you have so many futures that are offered, and I assume that there's way more volume on these futures leading up to a tournament because you have so many recreationals who are looking to bet tournament winner, region winner, things of that nature. Then you have the individual games themselves. Is there overlap between those two? Will you sometimes potentially shade opposite of a team where you have a huge liability on futures? From a trading perspective, how do you encapsulate all of that?
It sounds obnoxious, but 4 years in, I haven't had a losing March Madness, and that's with all the poor recreational feeds and everything else. There's just so much volume comes in recreationally during the March Madness period that you can ride out any, long-term futures and anything that's sort of sitting there. Of course, the big schools, the big colleges are going to dominate the market for the most part. And in our sports books, if you operate in just one state that is, no pro team like Arkansas, if the Hogs go far, if they, Calipari and everything else, they beat Kansas and I think it's 10v7. If that happens, we know, and the sportsbook partner knows, we're in for a significant loss. But at the same time, they, again, varies operation to operation. They play into that. They will be like, you got us, and they'll put new promos out and they'll boost it and everything else. We've been very fortunate since we've gone live with them that the Hogs on every sport have not performed very well. It's inevitable at some point they will go on a run. Is it going to be this tournament? Are they going to get far, hitting form at the right time type of thing? Is like, could they be the Cinderella run this time around? That will kill us in Arkansas. That will blow out, huge profit that we've had over the course of a full, football season, full basketball season, etc. It's been very solid outside of the December window where I think everybody lost on this side of the counter. But the operators ourselves are very open to that variance. We're very open to the Cinderella stories, etc. It's like it benefits both parties. We hope that they have enjoyed that experience and we retain their wallet share going forward off the back of that win, and they pump that money back into the sportsbook, or at least if they don't, if they want to make their withdrawals, that they're coming back in football season, or they're coming back at times where, we want to see the recreational business again. So from my side, I'm maybe unique in that, yeah, you have those peaks and troughs when it comes to Super Bowl, when it comes to March Madness, when it comes to bowls, when it comes to the NBA playoffs. You're going to have a lot of variance at hand, but it's the long game, and I'd much rather have them win, enjoy the tournament, maybe win a few brackets, have that experience, enjoy the product, be paid out quickly, be able to withdraw quickly, retain the customer going forward, than get stuck into the balancing of liabilities between futures and outrights. Other books will be very, very different. A Circa, Prime, their MO will mean that they will have to maybe shade a few prices and do stuff differently. We're quite open that, I don't want to be perceived as, okay, we're one of 3 sports books in Arkansas. Are we going to shave the Hogs price? No, we want to be top price on the Hogs. Mm-hmm. We want to take the business away from Playtech and Camby, or Oaklawn and Betley, that are the other 2 operators there. It's like, no, let's embrace that, take it on, and hope that their experience this time will retain that wallet long term.
Interesting. I always like to ask guests that are on the trading side of things about misconceptions in the space, because I hear a lot of them. You get casual bettors all the time that believe they understand how trading works. You hear stuff all the time about how sportsbooks are trying to balance the action 50-50, but then I always have people on from sportsbooks who are like, no, that's not the case. We've never thought about doing that. What's a common misconception that you think casual bettors have about how sports operate, let's say during a major event like this, like March Madness?
I'm probably regurgitating what others have said already on previous iterations of the podcast, but we don't look at stuff like betting splits. Like it's a totally irrelevant metric to us. I guess you can shade prices if you want to off the back of that, but we're more concerned in the here and now and the market efficiency. And, if the price is right, and I'm seeing market making books offer 100K limits on sides and totals and things like that, that's the predominant feature. Do we have to shade a few lines because an operator requests or a sportsbook requests that they want to be top price, or they want to be, bias price 2% off market and stick that hard bias in? Of course, it does happen from time to time, but for the most part, we don't care about stuff like betting splits. We don't care if there's a lot of liability on one side. If we have confidence in the market efficiency and the market price, we're willing to ride that variance out and hope that, again, it plays out long-term in our favor. We have the advantage, in theory, if we have that 10% hold, or, we have the margin in our favor. If we have the price efficiency right and we have the risk management right, we can leverage that and be prepared to hold long term on it and just ride out the wave. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer again, but it's tricky. It's like, sorry, there is the other one that strikes out in my head at the minute is just the total lack of understanding on the recreational side around what goes into the mechanics of pricing an SGP. Like, this one is a headache that has gone back and forth. We have tried for years to get the pricing mechanics right. The recreational punter will not see just how much effort it is to price all iterations on an SGP. And some of the companies are doing very well in this space at the minute on that front. Others have a lot left to be desired and just overcome it by whacking on extra margin and, hide the flaws. But yeah, if anybody thinks an SGP is the same as a parlay and it's all one fluid thing, and amount of customer service questions that our operators have to deal with on that side in terms of, well, that's not the right payout for combining assists and props and the team total and everything else. Yeah, that's another misconception. I'd say just the mechanics behind an SGP and how much it differentiates from a standard parlay.
I can only imagine the frustration I would have if I had to answer those questions daily. Godspeed to those who are having to deal with that in customer service. Mark, really appreciate you spending the time here, as is tradition here on Circle's off, we end with something a little bit different, plus EV, minus EV. So the floor is yours. One thing that you think is plus EV in life, one thing that you think is minus EV in life. Could be sports betting related, could be anything. Completely up to you.
I've kind of touched on it, that period I was out of work, that 10 months, I consumed content day in, day out. Off the back of that, I'm a massive advocate for podcasts and a massive advocate for audiobooks and everything associated with that. However, the EV move is to know the circumstances that you should listen to a certain type of content or a certain type of product. So for me, I consume during the day. If I'm going for a walk, for example, I'm happy to listen to the betting content, betting podcasts. My head is fresh. I can think about the triggers that are there. Ask me to listen to a betting podcast while trying to fall asleep, I'd be wired. It's the same as looking at, scoring apps. You've got a bet that you're sweating and stuff. For me, my plus EV move is find a genre of podcast. If you need to be someone that needs to listen to something falling asleep, be it music, be it podcast. For me, it's podcasts. Listen to something that when that 15-minute sleep timer goes off, you're snoozing, you're out cold. For me, it's never going to be betting content in that space. It's going to be history podcasts randomly. I'm out like a light in that 15-minute window. So knowing when to one, being an advocate for listening to podcasts to begin with, but then knowing when to listen to the podcast depending on the circumstance. The other little thing I'd say on the plus EV side, on the podcast side, is we live in a world now where loads of people are telling you how to live your life, how to be productive, how to do things. I do actually want to shout out, you did that very heartfelt podcast recently, and you mentioned a book that deviated for me away from what I would typically listen to. What was the name of the book? You can remind me, Rob.
It was Die With Zero by Bill Perkins.
Yeah. Now, rightly or wrongly, I am old school and from the school of thought where you should be saving, you should be building for the future, suffer now to enjoy later and stuff. And that did shift my mindset a little bit off the back of that. But one of the big things I like in the podcast space is productivity related podcasts. So I'm going to shout out to Beyond the To-Do List and the Productivity Show. Like no competition of you guys, so I'm not going to say that, but they're two podcasts that the latter of which is ironically run by the Asian Efficiency Network. And I did say to the guys on Betstamp Discord that I would shout them out, but I'm going to shout out one individual who sums up Asian efficiency to an absolute T. It's a guy called ABCDE. He's an Ontario bettor. Whether he is who I think he is in that space, I don't know. He has a very Asian sounding name. He is the top winner on Fitzdare's NBA. Very, very shrewd, totally efficient. And if a podcast ever summed up Asian efficiency, or a person ever summed up Asian efficiency, it's him. Not the Romars of these worlds, it's the ABCDEs that, have that efficiency down to T. So again, few different pieces there as plus EV. Love podcasts, love audiobooks. I think you've maybe said it before. Certainly some people have said it on Circles Back or Circles Off. Like there's definitely a world where there's a lot of crap out there in the content space.
Yep.
And I think you need to weed through the crap and listen to the crap to understand what's good in the space. And I over the last year, 2 years, there hasn't been a podcast in this space that I've listened to where I haven't picked up some sort of nugget or something that has made the cogs go, like it did when I was out of work for 10 months. That's made the cogs go, I want to learn more about that, or I need to just find out, he said something or she said something there. Do I want to follow up on that? I'm not entering the cesspit that is the Twitter Spaces at the minute. Like I've avoided that. Yeah. I tuned in the other day for 10 minutes at 6:30 in the morning my time, because I was just out of bed, and I listened for 10 minutes. It was absolutely atrocious. I don't know how you weed through that. Like, you've got a very good producer there. Everything is like stamped with what will be on and which part of the show, and you can weed through that and really, I want to hear from this person. I want to hear this piece of content. Just blindly listening to that type of stuff for that amount of time, God help you. Like, I know you've dipped in and out of it.
I go through cycles on it. So there are some weeks I'm really into it, some weeks I'm not. I don't know. I think it's a lot about who you are as a person. I like to mix it up. I like controversy. I like to argue. I've always been argumentative in a way. So it kind of just fits my personality. People are always like, you're wasting time. Probably, but like, you know, the alternative for some other people is they're going to sit at home and watch something on Netflix, right? And I would argue that that's a waste of time. I do the same thing every now and then, but however people want to use their own, you know, their own personal time for entertainment, I say go for it. And you mentioned history podcasts will put you to sleep in 15 minutes. I have one podcast that always puts me to sleep. It's called Be Better Bettors. If you want to check that out, you'll be asleep within the first 3 minutes every single time before the host even gets through the intro of the show. But worth listening to. Be Better Bettors as well. I'll give them a plug.
Well, the only thing is that you have to listen on 2.5 times speed. Like
Spotify needs to add more levels, 4x speed, 5x speed. They got to do something. But no, I'm just kidding. That's Spanky's podcast for those that don't know. It's very entertaining. I would put it on. If you enjoy this podcast, check out Be Better Bettors as well. Minus EV, Mark.
This is going to sound like a dig at some of my colleagues at Amelco.
Ooh, love that. Stir the pot at work.
It's not intentional. Literally, my head of sportsbook is one of the worst people in the world for this. And it's very work post-COVID centric. We do a lot of online meetings. Turn your camera on. It's like But then you have to put on pants, Mark, if you turn, or you got to put on clothes. I'm not saying verbatim you have to have it on every single time, but when it's an operator or a customer call or an internal stakeholder meeting, I really would advocate for having cameras switched on in Zoom, Google Meets, no longer have Skype, but Microsoft Teams, something like that. It's like the rapport that I've built with my colleagues on the other side of the pond predominantly has come around from me never having my camera off. And you feed off their energy. I've still not met so many of the customers I've talked about today on this show. Like, I've not met in person the Saracen crew that I work with. I've not met in person the likes of Alan Berg and the guys at Win. I've not met a lot of the 99 guys in person. It's like, but I feel like I have friends, colleagues, counterparts that know me, I know them, and you build the rapport and the relationship with them. If you're just looking at an egghead the whole time, or a black screen, it's very difficult to build the foundation and the trust. And yes, of course, there will be circumstances where you want to have camera off, fine, but just know when it's suitable to have cameras off and know when's not. You're probably very similar on these types of shows. You feed off the cues, you feed off the energy, and 100%. You can build off that. If you have a camera off and you can hear tones, yes, but you can't really truly read what the other person is thinking, and it's to your detriment. Again, it's not a go at my head of sportsbook or most of the trading team who say we have forums, we have trading meetings, cameras off. And unfortunately, I'll say it here, but it's like, it just doesn't reflect well long-term. We need to build relationships and we'd love everybody in the same room 24/7, run a proper trading floor with a proper trading vibe. But yeah, camera on. Cameras off is negative.
I know I was joking at the beginning, but I couldn't agree with you more. For me, there's nothing more frustrating than doing a group call and like one person's camera is off and you never know if they're paying attention or not or anything like that. Totally agree on that front. His name is Mark Hill. You can follow him on Twitter, and I suggest you do, at Mark Hill Sports. Check him out. This has been really fascinating for me, Mark. Appreciate you joining, and maybe we'll do another one down the road because there's actually, I could probably go another 5 hours with you, honestly, at some point or another. For those of you who enjoyed the interview, make sure you smash that like button down below. Next week, Monday, new edition of Circle Back. Next Thursday, Mr. Peanut Better making his debut. If you got some questions for Mr. Peanut Better, leave them in the comments down below. Make sure you're subbed here on Circles Off. We'll catch you back here next week. Peace out, everyone.